It's funny how you can be so sure of something, right? Life feels solid, predictable, like you're on autopilot, and then, just like that, it all falls apart like the whole damn thing was built on sand. That's what happened with Samantha. 6 years we spent together. 6 years of what I thought was a marriage that couldn't be touched. Sure, we had our moments, arguments, boring stretches where it felt like we were just roommates. But if you'd asked me back then, I'd have sworn we were happy. Everything seemed to be fine, right up until it wasn't. Looking back, there were signs. Small ones, easy to miss. But I never thought she'd turn into someone I couldn't even recognize. It all started when she got that new job. I thought, okay, this could be a good thing for her. She was excited about it, and I was proud of her. New company, bigger responsibilities, all these opportunities she was always talking about. But as soon as she stepped into that role, everything started to change. I still remember the first time I felt it. One of those little things you wouldn't normally even think twice about. She used to text me all the time, just random stuff like, "What's for lunch?" Or, "Don't forget the milk." But then one day, poof, nothing. At first, I figured she was busy with her new gig. But it wasn't just the texts. Her whole schedule started shifting. Suddenly, she was staying late at the office, going to these business dinners and team-building events. At first, I didn't question it. I mean, I was proud of her. She had always been driven, and I figured this was her time to shine, right? She was climbing the ladder. But then she started to change, not just her hours, but her attitude. It was like she put up a wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. Conversations got shorter, her smile. Hell, her laugh was almost gone. That laugh I used to love, it felt like it was from a different time. And sex? Yeah, that was the part that really made it sink in. At first, I told myself she was just exhausted. A new job, more pressure, I understood. But weeks turned into months, and it was the same story. "I'm too tired," or "I'm not in the mood." I tried to give her space, be patient. But the distance kept growing, and I just stood there, helpless, as she pulled further away. I'll never forget one night. It was around 10 p.m., and she still wasn't home. I called her voicemail. When she finally came in, it was after midnight, and she had this bullshit excuse about some emergency meeting running late. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But something was off. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Then there was her phone. Never thought much about it before. But now? She was always making sure it was face down, buried in her purse, or kept on Do Not Disturb. She used to be the kind of person who couldn't go 5 minutes without checking her phone. But now, I catch a glimpse of it, and she'd go on the defensive, snapping at me like I was some kind of weirdo for even looking at it. Maybe I was paranoid. Hell, I probably was at first. But then, my gut was telling me something was up, and you know what? I wasn't wrong. The breaking point came one night, during one of her business trips. This time, I wasn't buying it. So, I stayed up, like an idiot, waiting for her to get back, hoping she'd prove me wrong. But as the hours dragged on, that sick feeling in my stomach kept growing. She came back well after midnight. Perfume that wasn't hers. That faraway look in her eyes like she wasn't even present. I asked about the trip, and she gave me some half-baked excuse that didn't even come close to matching up. That's when I knew. I had to find out what was really going on. I'm not proud of it, but yeah, I went through her phone. Took a couple tries to get the passcode right, but when I did, I wish I hadn't. There it was, messages between her and Brian. Not just casual work stuff either. There were messages about how much they missed each other, pictures of them together, looking way too close. It hit me like a ton of bricks. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting there on the bed, phone in hand. I didn't even say a word, just showed her the screen. She turned white as a sheet but tried to cover it up, saying it was just a joke, that Brian was just a friend. A friend? Give me a break. Friends don't send shit like this. I shot back, but she kept denying it, pushing the same tired excuses. Then she had the nerve to act like I was the bad guy for even looking at her phone. That's when I knew. She wasn't even sorry.
No remorse. No guilt.
Just more lies. I pushed her for the truth, and she finally came up with some excuse about how she'd been feeling disconnected from me. that I was emotionally distant. Are you kidding me? I was the one working my ass off, trying to hold everything together while she was off screwing around with her so-called supportive colleague. It's not like that, she said, looking at me with those same eyes. Those eyes that used to make me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I just needed to feel alive. Yeah, right. Needed to feel alive? So, she tossed 6 years of marriage out the window for that? I don't know what made me angrier. The fact that she cheated or that she thought I was dumb enough to fall for her lies. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. She wanted to feel alive? Fine. I'd show her just how alive I could make her feel, by taking control back. That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to be some pathetic, heartbroken husband. If Samantha thought she could just stab me in the back and then move on like nothing happened, she had another thing coming. I wasn't about to walk away. Not yet. First, I was going to make her regret every damn second she spent with that bastard. So, there I was, stuck in the wreckage of my marriage, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. After confronting Samantha, I wasn't about to just sit there and let her get away with all the lies and bullshit. The thing is, when you've been blindsided like that, when the rug is ripped out from under you, everything changes. You start seeing things differently. It's like a switch flips in your brain. And for me, that switch was set to revenge. I wasn't going to cry about it. No way. If she wanted to throw her life away with some douchebag from work, thinking she could find freedom in his arms, I was going to show her just how low she could really feel. And that's when it hit me. I had the perfect person to help me get back at her. Margaret, her mother. Now, before you go judging me, hear me out. Margaret had always been good to me. When Samantha would fly off the handle over the tiniest things, Margaret was the one who'd tell me to stay strong, offer me advice, genuinely care about how I was holding up. And yeah, I had noticed how goddamn attractive she was. Sure, she was older, but she had this presence, something magnetic. I'd always admired her. But now, in my twisted head, she was more than just Samantha's mom. She was my ticket to revenge. First, it was simple. I started reaching out to Margaret more, telling her I needed someone to talk to. She was always so eager to help, inviting me over for dinner, checking in on me. I played the part of the broken husband flawlessly, telling her how Samantha had been pulling away, how I was trying to keep it together but didn't know how much longer I could hang on. It wasn't a total lie, but I definitely played up the helpless, heartbroken role. Margaret ate it all up. She was all over me, so worried about my well-being, asking if I was okay, offering to help in any way she could. And I took full advantage of that. Every time I went over, I'd lay it on thick, complimenting her, telling her how much I appreciated her kindness, how I didn't know what I'd do without her. I could see it in her eyes. She was eating it up, feeling like she was the one saving me from all this misery. It started off innocent enough. She'd invite me over to her place, telling me I shouldn't be alone. At first, we just sat in the kitchen, chatting over a couple of glasses of wine. But soon, the conversations went deeper. I'd talk about how broken I was, how I didn't know who I could trust anymore. And she'd give me this pitiful look, like she felt my pain. It was like taking candy from a baby. Then one night, when Samantha was off on one of her business trips, I decided to take things up a notch. Margaret had asked me to come over to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. I showed up, toolbox in hand, but let's be real, I had other plans. After we finished with the repairs, we ended up in her living room, just talking. I could tell she was lonely, desperate for attention, and I wasn't blind to that. I started sitting a little closer, touching her arm when I spoke, letting my fingers linger just a bit longer than necessary. She was flustered. I could see it, but she didn't pull away. That's when I knew I had her. We kept talking, and at some point, I dropped a compliment, told her how beautiful she looked. She laughed it off, but I could see her cheeks turn pink. Then I went for it. Leaned in slow, not too fast, just enough to see what would happen. At first, she tensed up, like she wasn't sure if she was about to lose her mind. But I whispered something about how grateful I was for everything she'd done for me, how she was the only one who really understood me. I watched her resolve melt away, right before my eyes. She was alone. I was alone. And suddenly, It felt like two broken people trying to find something to hold on to. When I kissed her, she didn't pull away. In fact, she kissed me back, and before I knew it, we were ripping each other's clothes off. I'm not going to go into the details, but let's just say that night, I forgot all about Samantha. Hell, I forgot about everything else. It was just me and Margaret, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. After that night, things moved fast. Every time Samantha was off on one of her business trips, I found myself back at Margaret's place. She was like a drug, something I couldn't stop going back to. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some love story. This was about control. About taking something that Samantha would never expect, never see coming. Every time I was with Margaret, I felt this sick satisfaction, like I was getting back at Samantha without her even knowing it. Margaret, bless her heart, thought it was all about finding comfort in each other. She had no idea I was using her to get back at her daughter. And that made it all the sweeter. I'd listen to her go on about how she wished Samantha had made better choices, how maybe we could work things out. She had no clue that her innocent little girl was out there sleeping with another guy while I was in her bed. And the best part? Samantha had no idea. She'd call Margaret to check in, completely unaware that I had just spent the night in her bed. I'd lie there, listening to them talk while Margaret was still naked beside me, pretending everything was fine. The irony was almost too good to be true. This went on for weeks. Every time Samantha had a late meeting or went away for the weekend, I'd end up back at Margaret's. And I could see it. Margaret was starting to fall for me. She'd talk about how she wished Samantha would have chosen a better path, how maybe we could fix things. Little did she know we were long past that. After a few weeks of this twisted little affair, I realized it wasn't enough. Sure, screwing my wife's mother felt damn satisfying. But that was just the appetizer. I needed the main course. I needed Samantha to feel the full weight of the humiliation and betrayal I felt when I first discovered what she'd done with Brian. That's when I decided I wasn't going to just sit back and watch Samantha waltz off into her little fantasy with that asshole Brian, while I played the part of the oblivious husband. No, if she thought she could do that and get away scot-free, she was in for a hell of a surprise. I wasn't about to walk away from this marriage. At least not yet. First, I needed to make her feel every ounce of pain she had caused me, and I was going to do it by using her own damn mother against her. I didn't dive in head first. No, I took my time, planted little seeds here and there. Subtle comments at family gatherings. Just enough to get people curious, but not enough for anyone to accuse me of anything outright. I casually talk about how Margaret had been a huge support for me, how she'd really stepped up during this tough time. The first few times, people probably just assumed I was the grieving husband, wallowing in my loss. But then I'd add something else. A look that lasted just a bit longer than necessary. A hand lingering on Margaret's shoulder. A touch that seemed innocent to the untrained eye but screamed, "Something's going on," if you were paying attention. I'll never forget one Sunday brunch at Samantha's aunt's house. Everyone was there, her cousins, her friends, a few of her colleagues. Perfect setup for what I had in mind. I made sure to sit next to Margaret. We talked, of course, like nothing was amiss. But I leaned in a little closer than usual, and when she laughed, I put my hand on her knee. Just for a second, but it was enough. And I made sure people saw it. Her cousin, Tara, gave me this odd look from across the table, but she didn't say a word, just raised an eyebrow and whispered something to the person next to her. That's when I knew things were working. The whispers started that day, and I made sure to fuel them, bit by bit, every chance I got. Margaret, sweet but clueless, had no idea what was going on. She thought we were just getting closer, that I was finally being more open with her. She had no idea she was being used as a pawn in my twisted game to tear her daughter's life apart. As the weeks went by, those whispers turned into full-blown gossip. Samantha's friends started giving her strange looks. Her colleagues stopped inviting her to the usual after-work drinks. Every time she came back from a business trip, I'd drop a little comment about how Margaret had checked in on me. "Your mom's been such a support," I'd say with this innocent little smile. "She even stayed over last weekend when you were gone. It was nice not feeling so alone for once." You should have seen Samantha's face. She'd stiffen, go on the defensive, probably thinking I was just being petty. But I'd flash a sweet, innocent grin, like I was completely oblivious to what was really going on. Then came the tipping point. Samantha came back from another one of her trips, and the atmosphere in our house was thick enough to choke on. She had to have heard something by then because she was acting strange, asking questions, probing me without outright accusing me of anything. But I stuck to my script, acting like the confused, innocent husband who didn't know why she was suddenly on edge. The real fireworks came at a mutual friend's engagement party. It was one of those events where everyone in their social circle comes together, and you can practically feel the gossip in the air. I showed up with Margaret on my arm, of course. Samantha had arrived separately, likely thinking she could hide in the crowd, chatting with her colleagues and pretending everything was fine. When Margaret and I walked in together, the looks we got were priceless. People were whispering, exchanging glances, nudging each other. I walked right up to Samantha, acting like it was completely normal for me to show up with her mother as my date. "Hey babe," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Hope you don't mind, but Margaret wanted to keep me company tonight." Samantha's eyes nearly popped out of her head. For a split second, I thought she was going to explode right there, but she kept it together, barely. She excused herself, but not before giving me a look that could have melted a glacier. After that night, the whole thing blew wide open. The rumors spread like wildfire. Samantha's friends started pulling away. Colleagues stopped inviting her to social events. And I heard through the grapevine that she completely lost it when someone asked her about me and Margaret. But the best part? Samantha came home that night, and you could feel the tension in the room. She was shaking, either with anger or humiliation. I couldn't really tell. "What the hell are you doing with my mother?" she screamed. The door barely even shut behind her. I just shrugged. "She's been there for me, Samantha. More than you ever were." "You're sick," she spat, her face red with rage. "How could you do this? With my mother?" I stood there, letting her scream, letting the venom pour out. It was like all the resentment and anger she'd been holding back finally came spilling out. But here's the thing, it didn't matter. She could yell all she wanted. The damage was done. Her world was falling apart, and she had no one to blame but herself. Margaret, poor thing, was a mess. She called me, crying, asking what had happened, why Samantha wouldn't talk to her. I comforted her, of course, told her not to worry. Samantha was just being unreasonable. But inside, I was reveling in it. Everything was going according to plan. Samantha was humiliated. Margaret was confused. And I was sitting back, watching it all unfold like some twisted spectator. Samantha tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, tried to fight back, but it was too late. The scandal was out there now. People knew. And the best part? I didn't have to do a damn thing. I just watched the wreckage, enjoying every minute of it. But I wasn't done. The humiliation, the scandal, that was just the opening act. I wanted more. I wanted her to feel it, to suffer like I had. And there was one more thing I needed to do. That's when I knew it was time to move to the next phase. Because if she thought this was bad, she hadn't seen anything yet. You'd think I would have felt satisfied, watching Samantha's life fall apart in front of me. But no. Sure, the shock on her face when she found out about me and Margaret was sweet. But it was only the beginning. I wanted more than just a scandal. I wanted to watch her life burn to the ground, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ashes. The affair with Margaret? That was just the opening act. Now it was time for the real game, watching Samantha's entire world come crashing down. If she thought she could waltz away with her hotshot lover, leaving me in the dust, she was about to find out the hard way that I wasn't someone you could screw over without consequences. The first thing I did was take a hard look at our finances. While Samantha was busy playing house with Brian, she never even noticed how much control I'd quietly seized over our financial situation. I had full access to everything: bank accounts, investments, retirement funds. It was all right there at my fingertips. And Samantha? She was too wrapped up in her affair, trying to salvage her image after the scandal with her mother, to pay attention to the state of our joint accounts. So I started moving money around. Small transfers at first, just enough to go unnoticed. I didn't need to drain everything all at once. I was playing the long game. I opened accounts in my name, made a few investments she knew nothing about, and quietly stashed away a chunk of our savings offshore. All the while, I kept up the act, pretending to be the devastated husband she thought I was. I was patient, methodical. The goal was to bleed her slowly, like a leech, so she wouldn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. And she made it easy, still trying to juggle her affair, her job, and the public fallout from the humiliation I'd set in motion. The day Samantha finally caught on, it was already too late. I remember it like it was yesterday. She stormed into the house, face flushed, holding her phone like it was a weapon. "What the hell is going on, Harry?" she shouted, shoving her phone in my face. "Our accounts. There's money missing. Did you take it?" I leaned back in my chair, putting on my best confused act. "What are you talking about, Samantha? You've been the one handling the finances, remember?" It was a complete lie, of course, but she had no idea. I'd been moving money around, altering records, and covering my tracks for months. She was too busy with the fallout from her affair to notice that I was quietly dismantling everything we'd built. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "Don't play dumb with me. I've been trying to pay some bills and it's gone, Harry. Where the hell did it go?" I shrugged, playing it cool. "Maybe you should ask Brian. I mean, you two seem to have everything else figured out, don't you?" For a moment, there was silence. The accusation hung in the air like a heavy weight. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out if I was bluffing or if she'd truly let everything spiral out of control. By the time she realized I was serious, I'd already drained most of our liquid assets. The house? I'd secretly refinanced it in my name. Our joint business ventures? I'd moved my shares into a holding company she couldn't touch. Every step I took, I stayed one step ahead of her, and she was left scrambling to catch up. Watching her panic, trying to salvage the mess she'd made of her life, gave me a sick sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't finished yet. If she thought she could hire a fancy lawyer and take me down, she had another thing coming. I had already prepared for this. I hired a lawyer of my own, someone from college who owed me a favor. This guy was ruthless, the kind of lawyer who could find a loophole in a steel wall. Together, we combed through every joint account, every investment, searching for ways to take what little she had left. Samantha fought back hard. She hired a big-shot attorney, some guy who thought he was untouchable. But by the time he came into the picture, I'd already laid the groundwork. I had years of financial records, documents showing her signing off on investments she didn't even remember. I even had emails between her and Brian about business expenses. I used to claim she was embezzling from our accounts. She tried to accuse me of fraud, but I'd covered my tracks so well that her lawyer couldn't find a single shred of evidence to pin on me. The court battle was ugly, but I was relentless. I made sure every detail worked against her. The affair, the rumors, even her mother's betrayal. It was clear she was crumbling. Every court session, every meeting with her attorney, she came in looking more defeated, more exhausted. The confident, cold woman who once told me she needed space to find herself was now a hollow shell of that person. I had taken everything from her, piece by piece, and there was nothing left. In the end, the divorce was a slaughter. I walked away with everything, the house, the majority of our investments, and a hefty portion of her savings. She was left with scraps, barely enough to cover her legal fees. And her reputation? That was shattered beyond repair. Colleagues who used to laugh and joke with her now avoided her like she was toxic. But the best part? Watching her face as the judge read the final decree. She was pale, her eyes hollow, like she couldn't quite grasp how far she'd fallen. And me? I stood there, smiling, knowing I had played her like a damn violin, and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. After the ruling, Samantha tried to corner me outside the courthouse. She looked broken, but still had the nerve to ask me, "Was it worth it, Harry?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Destroying everything we built?" I leaned in close so only she could hear. "Worth it? Sweetheart, this is just the beginning." She just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes, but I felt nothing.
No pity. No regret.
She had broken me, so I shattered everything she cared about. And as I walked away from her, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. But even then, I knew I wasn't finished. There was one more move to make, one final nail to drive into the coffin of the life we once shared. Funny thing, though, after all that destruction, after watching her fall apart, I woke up the next day feeling empty. Sure, seeing Samantha reduced to nothing, walking out of that courthouse with nothing but tears and regret in her eyes, that was satisfying as hell. But the rush didn't last. The thrill was fleeting, like a high that's already wearing off. Once the divorce was finalized, I knew I had to get the hell out of that town. Too many reminders. Too many people who now saw me as the guy whose wife cheated with her coworker and finally got what was coming to him. I needed to cut ties completely, so I sold the house, the very one where all the lies had been crafted, and took every last dime from the deal. I wasn't sticking around for any more of that. It was time for a fresh start. That's how I ended up in Phoenix. Phoenix was a world apart from everything I left behind. Different people, different places, and the heat. It was brutal, almost like it was burning away the ghosts of my past. I found a decent condo in the heart of the city, nothing extravagant, just enough to remind me that I had earned it. The best part? Nobody here had the faintest clue about my past. I was free to start over and become whoever the hell I wanted. I threw myself into work. I dug into the connections I'd made during my marriage to Samantha, pulling whatever strings I could to land a sweet gig that paid way better than anything I'd ever seen before. And yeah, I took charge of the businesses we'd built together. Those were mine now. I made damn sure of that. The company was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to worry about someone else's bullshit weighing me down. But let's not pretend I was some kind of saint. I had money, I had freedom, and I had a clean slate, and I was going to use all of it. I wasn't looking for anything serious. Hell, after everything Samantha put me through, the last thing I wanted was another complicated relationship. I needed casual flings, no strings, just pure enjoyment. Phoenix was full of beautiful women who were more than willing to have a drink and a night with a guy who appeared to have his act together. And I was more than happy to oblige. Then I met Olivia. She was different. I wasn't looking for someone like her, but somehow, she crossed my path. We met at one of those boring, fake networking events where everyone pretends to be interested in each other's LinkedIn profiles. She was new to the city, just starting her own business, and there was something in her eyes, a spark that made her stand out from the rest. She was confident, smart, and didn't take crap from anyone. Not like Samantha, who needed constant validation from every guy she met. At first, we kept things casual, drinks after work, the occasional dinner. But I won't lie, Olivia slowly started to get under my skin. She was nothing like Samantha. She was supportive, sure, but she wasn't afraid to call me out when I was being a stubborn asshole. And I liked that. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was with someone who actually cared about who I was as a person, not just what I could offer them. But even as things with Olivia started to heat up, there were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting back to Samantha. Not because I missed her, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the look on her face when she realized how much I'd destroyed her. I still remember that moment in the divorce hearing when she tried to convince the judge that I'd manipulated our finances. She thought she had me beat, but by then, I'd already played my hand, and she was just too late. Olivia didn't know any of this, of course. She knew I'd gone through a nasty divorce, but I kept the details vague. What was I going to tell her? By the way, I destroyed my ex-wife financially and slept with her mother just to watch her suffer? Yeah, not exactly the kind of thing you share over a nice dinner. So, I buried that part of my past deep, hidden under the life I was trying to build. And for a while, it worked. I was content. I had Olivia, a business that was thriving, and no one in Phoenix knew a damn thing about the wreckage I'd left behind. But there were still those odd moments, when I'd get a text from an unknown number. Always something short, like, "Hope you're doing well," or "Thinking of you." I knew it was Margaret. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce, but it was clear she wasn't ready to let go. I never responded. There was no point. Margaret was just another casualty in the war Samantha started. It wasn't her fault, but in the end, she was collateral damage. And some nights, when Olivia was asleep beside me, I'd find myself thinking about the destruction I'd caused, wondering if I'd taken things too far. But then I'd remember Samantha's face. I'd remember the way she'd begged me to stop the divorce, pleaded for her dignity. That's when I'd smile, knowing that in the end, she was getting exactly what she deserved. Olivia kept pushing me to talk about my past. I could tell she was curious, trying to understand why I was so distant sometimes. One night, after a few glasses of wine, she finally pushed hard enough that I gave her just a little taste of the truth. I went through a nasty divorce, I told her, staring at my glass. My ex? She cheated, lied, and tried to screw me over. So I made sure she paid for it. Olivia was quiet for a beat, just watching me. I could see the questions flickering in her eyes, but she didn't press any further. Instead, she just nodded, like she got it. Maybe she did, or maybe she was just willing to overlook it because she saw something in me worth saving. For the first time in ages, I felt something I hadn't in a long while: peace. Maybe I hadn't handled things perfectly, but who the hell does? Life's messy, and sometimes you've got to get your hands dirty to get what you deserve. But as Olivia and I grew closer, there was always that nagging thought in the back of my mind. Could I really leave it all behind? Could I truly let go of the man I'd become, the one who took pleasure in watching Samantha's world fall apart? For now, I was content to live in the moment, to let Olivia think I was just a guy who'd been hurt and was trying to start over. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was still the guy who destroyed my ex-wife's life, who played dirty and didn't think twice about it. And part of me wondered if there'd ever be a day of reckoning for everything I'd done. But until then, I was going to savor the life I'd built, the control I'd taken back. Because in the end, I had won. And that's when it hit me. None of that mattered anymore. Revenge is like a rush, almost addictive. It feels like you're on top of the world for a moment, but then the high fades, leaving you empty. I thought I'd fill the void Samantha left by taking everything from her, and for a while it worked. But as the weeks and months passed in Phoenix, I realized something I hadn't expected. I'd gotten my revenge, but there was still this hollow feeling inside. I had won, but it didn't fill the space where my peace should have been. Life settled into something that felt almost normal. Olivia and I had gotten closer, and honestly, she was everything Samantha wasn't. She was kind, easygoing, and actually cared about me, the real me, not just the perks I could offer. We spent our weekends exploring, hiking, laughing until our stomachs hurt. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but every now and then, my mind would wander back to what I'd done to get here. Those nights, I'd lie awake, unable to shake the guilt. I kept trying to tell myself that I did what had to be done. Samantha betrayed me, so I made her pay. But after a while, that satisfaction I once felt turned into something else. It was like eating a meal that tastes amazing at first, but hours later, it makes you sick to your stomach. That's what revenge felt like. One evening, Olivia and I had just finished dinner at a little Italian spot we'd discovered. We were walking back to my place when my phone buzzed. I figured it was just another work email or a spam text. But no, it was from Margaret. "Hey Harry, hope you're doing all right. I've been thinking about you." I froze. It had been months since I'd heard from Margaret. Not since the divorce, not since I'd used her to hurt Samantha. The last time I saw her, she was a mess, torn between her loyalty to her daughter and what we'd shared, however twisted that was. I stared at the screen, feeling this strange combination of guilt and something else. It was almost like regret, but I wasn't sure. I didn't respond. I let the message sit there. It was a reminder of the price I'd paid for revenge. I kept telling myself that Margaret was just another casualty in my game, collateral damage. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full truth. Margaret had been nothing but kind to me, probably the only person who hadn't been a part of my messed up plot, and I had used her just to hurt Samantha. Olivia picked up on it right away when we got back to my place. She could always tell when something was off. She poured us some wine, sat down next to me on the couch, and just waited. She knew I'd talk when I was ready. Eventually, I did. Not all of it, but enough to let her in. I told her about the betrayal, about Samantha, how I'd destroyed everything in our lives just to get even. I didn't go into the details about Margaret or how I'd manipulated her, but I gave Olivia a glimpse of the truth. She listened quietly, no judgment, no interruptions. When I was done, she reached over and took my hand. "You've been through hell, Harry, but maybe it's time to let it go. You're not that guy anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had held on to the anger, the need to control, the desire to get back at her. But here was this woman, looking at me like I was something worth saving, beyond the bitterness, beyond the pain. But letting go isn't easy. You can't just erase who you were overnight. Every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about that day in court, the look on Samantha's face when she realized everything she had was gone. I'd feel that dark satisfaction come creeping back, but now it was clouded by something else. Maybe regret, maybe guilt. I don't know. I didn't reply to Margaret's message, but it stayed with me, gnawing at me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd burned too many bridges, that I'd left too many people in my wake. Sure, I had one, but at what cost? Olivia didn't push me. She didn't ask for all my secrets. She just gave me the space to be, to sort through my mess at my own pace. And little by little, I started to see that maybe there was a life ahead of me where I wasn't tied to my past mistakes. One night, after we'd been together for almost a year, she asked, "What do you really want, Harry? What do you want out of life?" I didn't have an answer right away. For so long, I had been consumed with revenge, with the need to be in control, that I hadn't thought much about what came next. But as I looked at Olivia, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wanted a future where I didn't have to keep looking over my shoulder. A future where I wasn't haunted by the ghosts of my past. Letting go is the hardest thing in the world. It's so much easier to hold onto the anger, to keep blaming the world for what happened to you. But if I've learned anything, it's that building your life on revenge is a terrible foundation. Yeah, it feels good for a while, but when everything settles down, all that's left is a void. I'm not perfect now, and I haven't got it all figured out. Hell, I'm still that guy who ruined his ex-wife's life with no remorse. But I'm starting to understand that holding on to all that anger and bitterness isn't about punishing Samantha. It's about avoiding the real problem. Maybe I wasn't as innocent in all of this as I'd like to think. Olivia doesn't know the whole story, and maybe she never will. But she knows enough to see the parts of me worth saving. And maybe that's all I need. For the first time in a long time, I'm trying to focus on the future, not on some petty revenge. So here I am, months later, still figuring it out. I don't know if I'll ever fully let go of the past. But I'm trying, and maybe that's all anyone can do. In the end, I thought destroying Samantha would fix everything. But the real fight was always with myself. And now I'm trying to rebuild something real, something that isn't about revenge. Because in the end, winning doesn't mean anything if you've lost yourself along the way.